At 95, the world has said goodbye to one of Hollywood's most legendary icons, Gene Hackman. But what makes this farewell even more emotional is the heartbreaking story that unfolded just moments after his passing. Gene Hackman and his beloved wife, Betsy, were inseparable for decades, and in a tragic twist, they both passed within days of each other. As Hollywood's biggest stars pour in their tributes, it's Gene's own daughters who delivered a stunning and deeply personal tribute that left everyone in tears. What they revealed about their parents' final days and the legacy they left behind is something you won't want to miss. When we think of Gene Hackman, we picture the rugged charm, the intense performances, and the sheer brilliance that made him one of the greatest actors of all time. From his Oscar-winning roles to his commanding presence in classics like The French Connection, Unforgiven, and Hoyers, Hackman wasn't just a star, he was a force. But behind the spotlight, there was a quiet, deeply personal story, one that very few people knew about until now. At 95 years old, Gene Hackman's passing marked the end of an era in Hollywood. But the story didn't end there. Just as the entertainment world was coming to terms with losing such an iconic figure, another devastating blow followed. His wife, Betsy Irawa, with whom he shared more than 3 decades of love, also passed away. Their near-simultaneous deaths left family, friends, and fans heartbroken, but it was their daughter's emotional tribute that truly shook the world. In this video, we're going beyond the headlines. We'll uncover the touching detail of Gene Hackman's final days, the emotional farewell from his children, and the incredible outpouring of tributes from his fellow celebrities. From private family moments to the heartfelt messages shared by Hollywood's biggest names, we'll cover it all. Stay with us as we reveal how Gene and Betsy's love story came full circle, how their daughters paid tribute to not just their father's legendary career, but also the quiet strength of their mother and the legacy both parents leave behind. And trust me, there's one detail in their tribute that left even the most hardened hearts in tears. This is a story of love, loss, and legacy, one you'll want to hear until the very end. Gene Hackman was never your typical Hollywood icon. Even at the height of his fame, he maintained a private life, preferring quiet moments over red carpets. When he stepped away from acting in the early 2000s, many wondered why a man with so much talent would willingly walk away from an industry that adored him. But for Gene, the answer was simple: peace, family, and a desire to live life on his own terms. In his final years, Gene and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, found solace in their serene home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, far removed from the flashing cameras and the hustle of Los Angeles. Gene embraced a slower pace, one that allowed him to fully appreciate life's simplest moments, whether it was tending to his garden, painting in his home studio, or taking long drives through the vast desert landscapes. Gene seemed content with this quieter chapter of his life. But behind closed doors, there was an undeniable truth. Time was catching up. In the last few years, Gene's health had become fragile. Though he had always been strong and resilient, age eventually came for him, just as it does for all of us. His family, especially his daughters, grew more involved in his day-to-day care. They took turns visiting, ensuring their father felt supported and loved. As his health gradually declined, Betsy, his devoted wife of over 30 years, was his constant companion through it all. Their love story wasn't one filled with dramatic Hollywood scandals or front-page headlines. Instead, it was a quiet, enduring bond built on respect, humor, and an unshakable partnership. Betsy had stood by his side as Gene transitioned from the leading man on screen to the retired legend living life on his own terms. Her gentle care and unwavering devotion became even more evident in his final months. What made their relationship so unique was how they complemented each other. Gene, who had spent much of his life under the harsh spotlight, found comfort in Betsy's calm, grounded presence. She never sought attention for herself, always choosing to support Gene quietly in the background, but her influence on his life was undeniable. As Gene's health waned, Betsy's own health struggles also began to surface, and the couple faced the heartbreaking reality that their time together might be shorter than they hoped. Their daughters, always close despite Gene's private nature, began documenting those final months, not for the public, but for the family. They wanted to capture the essence of their parents' love story, the quiet conversations, the tender moments, and even the bittersweet goodbyes that emotional. Just when it seemed Gene's health might stabilize, tragedy struck again. Betsy's health took a sharp decline, and the couple found themselves facing a heartbreaking reality. They might not get to live out their twilight years together. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that would ultimately bind their stories even closer. And just when the world thought they knew everything about Gene Hackman, this private final chapter would leave everyone stunned. Because what Gene Hackman's daughters chose to do next is something no one saw coming. For decades, Gene Hackman captivated audiences with his raw talent and commanding presence. From The French Connection to Unforgiven, his performances left a permanent mark on Hollywood history. But what most people never realized was that while Gene excelled in front of the camera, his most cherished role was one that had nothing to do with fame: being a father and a husband. Unlike many of his Hollywood peers, Gene always struggled with the push and pull between stardom and family. In interviews, he rarely discussed his personal life, but behind the scenes, Gene carried both pride and regret when it came to his role as a father. His demanding career often kept him away from home, leaving his children to grow up with a larger-than-life father who was at times more present on the big screen than at the dinner table. His daughters, Elizabeth and Lacey, had a childhood shaped by both admiration and distance. They saw their father transform into iconic characters beloved by millions. Yet at home, he was a quieter, more reflective man, one who grappled with the weight of his own decisions. Gene often worried about whether he had done enough to truly know his children, especially during the prime years of his career, when scripts, sets, and award shows consumed most of his time. But retirement gave Gene something priceless: time, time to reconnect, time to apologize, and time to build new memories with his daughters and Betsy by his side. In Santa Fe, away from the relentless demands of Hollywood, Gene became not just their father, but their friend, confidant, and source of quiet wisdom. Family dinners replaced red carpet premieres. Long walks and deep conversations replaced studio meetings. It was a simpler life, but to Gene it was far more rewarding. However, there was a side to Gene's story the public never saw: the toll his health struggles took on his spirit. Even in retirement, the years of physical roles, long shoots, and personal stress left Gene's body vulnerable to the passage of time. Arthritis, heart issues, and general frailty slowly chipped away at the man who once seemed invincible on screen. Betsy, always the anchor, managed their home with love and care. But as her own health began to decline, their daughters stepped in, bridging the gap between caregiver and child. What makes this part of Gene Hackman's story so incredibly touching is how much his daughters became his protectors. They guarded his privacy fiercely, ensuring that even as the world speculated about his whereabouts and health, Gene could enjoy his final years in dignity. They turned down interview requests, refused tabloid offers, and kept their father's declining condition out of the spotlight, honoring his lifelong desire for privacy. But here's where it gets heartbreaking. As Gene's health declined, Betsy's health challenges escalated even faster. What began as minor symptoms soon spiraled into something far more serious. The strong, graceful woman who'd been Jean's rock for over 30 years was now facing her own mortality. Suddenly, the quiet home they had built together became a place of shared vulnerability. Two people who had weathered so much now, leaning on each other for strength in ways they never anticipated. Their daughters were not just witnesses to this, they became part of it. They organized doctor's appointments, managed medications, and coordinated home care, and through it all, they documented the quiet moments, the silent handholds, the whispered reassurances in the middle of the night, the small gestures of love that spoke louder than any grand Hollywood romance. It's a side of Gene Hackman's life no one ever saw, a tender human story hidden beneath the layers of fame and accolades. And just when it seemed the family was coming to terms with Jean's fragile condition, tragedy struck again, shattering their world in a way no one expected. Because what happened next, the decision Gene Hackman's daughters made after their parents' passing, was both heartbreaking and beautifully symbolic, something the world would only come to understand once the truth came out. For years, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa built a quiet life away from the flashing lights of Hollywood. Their days were simple, filled with the warmth of family, the rustling trees of Santa Fe, and a love that had only deepened with whole home. A painful reality was unfolding, one that neither Gene nor his daughter could escape. Betsy's health had been declining for some time, but it was in the final year that things took a devastating turn. What started as minor health issues gradually escalated into something much more serious. At first, it was just fatigue. She would feel drained after simple tasks, needing more rest than usual. Then came the doctor's visits, the medical tests, and finally the diagnosis that sent shockwaves through the family. Gene, at 95, was already in fragile health himself. But when it became clear that Betsy's condition was worsening, something in him changed. He was a man who had played tough, unbreakable characters throughout his career: detectives, outlaws, military leaders. But now he was facing a battle he couldn't fight, a loss he couldn't prevent. Watching the love of his life slip away before him was the hardest role he had ever played, and there was no script to prepare him for it. As Betsy's condition deteriorated, their daughters, Elizabeth and Leslie, made the difficult decision to bring in hospice care. They wanted their mother to be comfortable, surrounded by love in the home she and Gene had built together. The once lively house, filled with laughter and the occasional piano melody, became a place of quiet whispers, gentle touches, and tearful goodbyes. Gene spent most of his days at Betsy's side, holding her hand, whispering stories from their past, and ensuring she never felt alone. He reminisced about their early days together, how they met when he was still grieving the end of his first marriage, how she had been the calming force that brought back balance to his life. He told her how much he loved her over and over again, as if saying it enough times would somehow slow time itself. But here's where it gets truly heartbreaking. Betsy, even in her weakest moments, worried more about Gene than herself. She could see how much he was struggling, how much it pained him to watch her go, and in her final days, she made one last request to their daughters: "Take care of your father. He won't know how to live without me." It was a request that would haunt them in the days to come, because as much as they tried to prepare, no one could have predicted what would happen next. The moment that broke their daughters' hearts. Betsy passed away peacefully with Gene and their daughters by her side. The loss was immense, but it was what happened in the days following her passing that truly shattered those closest to them. Gene Hackman, strong, resilient, a fighter his entire life, simply couldn't bear the weight of losing Betsy. He had fought through Hollywood's toughest roles, survived the pressures of fame, and endured the ups and downs of a life in the spotlight. But this was a battle he had no strength left to fight. Just days after saying goodbye to Betsy, Gene's own health took a sudden and dramatic turn. His daughters watched in disbelief as the man who had always seemed larger than life faded before their eyes. It was as if, with Betsy gone, Gene no longer had a reason to hold on. His once strong voice grew quieter. His sharp wit, which had charmed audiences for decades, was replaced by long moments of silence. His body, already frail, seemed to surrender to the grief that consumed him. Doctors did their best, but in the end, it wasn't an illness or a medical condition that took Gene Hackman. It was something much deeper, much more painful. He passed away peacefully in his sleep just days after losing the love of his life. Some say it was heartbreak, others believe it was fate. But one thing was certain: Gene Hackman and Betsy Arawa were never meant to be apart for long. And now the world had lost not just an acting legend, but a man whose greatest role was simply loving the people closest to him. The daughters' stunning tribute that shook Hollywood. Elizabeth and Leslie Hackman had always respected their father's deep desire for privacy. Even in the wake of his passing, they debated how much of his story to share with the world. But as they went through their parents' belongings, they discovered something that made their decision for them, something that no one had ever seen before. It was an old leather-bound journal hidden away in Gene's personal study. Inside, they found handwritten letters from Gene to Betsy, spanning the course of their decades-long marriage. Some were simple notes of love. Others were deep reflections on their life together, their regrets, their happiest memories. But the most shocking part, the final entry, written just days before Betsy's passing in his frail handwriting, Gene had penned his final words to the love of his life: "If you go first, wait for me. I won't be long." It was a message that confirmed what his daughters already knew. Gene had never been meant to live without Betsy's eyes. True those words. And in that moment, they knew what they had to do. Instead of issuing a traditional press statement, Elizabeth and Leslie chose to honor their father and mother in a way that truly reflected their love. They compiled those letters into a private family tribute, a deeply personal memoir that captured the heart of who Gene Hackman really was, not just an actor, but a man who loved with his whole being. But here's where it gets even more emotional. When Hollywood found out about the tribute, celebrities from all generations came forward with their own heartfelt messages. Robert Duvall, one of Gene's oldest friends, shared a personal story about their early acting days and how Gene's biggest dream was never about winning Oscars. It was about building a life worth remembering. Clint Eastwood called Gene's passing the end of an era. Even younger actors, those who'd grown up watching Gene's performances, took to social media to express how much he had influenced them. And in a moment that truly stunned Hollywood, Gene Hackman's final journal entry was read aloud during a private tribute attended by his closest friends and family. The entire room was silent. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, because in the end, Gene Hackman's greatest story wasn't the roles he played on screen. It was the love he shared off-screen. And now that love story had reached its final chapter. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa may no longer be here, but their story, their love, their resilience, their quiet devotion will live on forever. Hollywood will remember Gene as one of the greatest actors of all time, but those who knew him best will remember him for something much greater, a man who lived and died for love. And as his daughters look back on their father's life, one thing is clear: Gene Hackman didn't just leave behind a legacy of films. He left behind a love story that will never be forgotten.